The chainsaws roared before sunrise. Sawdust clung to the air like smoke after a battlefield. By the time neighbors woke, my sanctuary, 3 towering oaks older than the subdivision itself, lay hacked to pieces. The HOA president stood nearby, smiling as if property values were more sacred than life itself. But those trees were more than wood. They were legacy, shade from summer barbecues, swing sets where children once laughed. When they fell, something inside me ignited. What happens when an HOA destroys the wrong person's roots? Someone who knows how to bury them in court instead. This story begins in Maple Glen, a quiet Colorado suburb where front lawns mattered more than families. For decades, the community thrived under towering oaks and maples, planted by the original homesteaders long before HOAs existed. Their branches arched into cathedral ceilings of green. Their roots dug deeper than the foundations of new McMansions. But beauty wasn't enough for the new regime. The HOA, led by a president who saw herself as a suburban monarch, decided views were more valuable than history. She wanted manicured perfection, uniform grass, unbroken sight lines, homes staged like real estate brochures. That vision collided with my property. 3-century-old oaks rose behind my fence. They weren't diseased. They weren't unsafe. They were simply inconvenient, blocking her personal mountain view, shading her luxury pool deck, casting unapproved shadows over her perfect backyard. So, she convened a secret board vote. No notice, no appeal, no due process. The HOA decreed, the trees must go. And before the sun rose the next morning, the saws came. When I returned from work, only stumps remained. The sweet scent of fresh-cut oak mixed with gasoline still burned my nostrils. Birds circled above, confused, their nests destroyed. My backyard was a graveyard. But the HOA's arrogance had created something it never expected, a federal judge's worst enemy. I wasn't just a grieving homeowner. I was a litigator with nothing left to lose. And this was Exhibit A. To understand why the HOA's mistake would cost them everything, you need to know me. I am Eleanor Blackwood, 57, recently widowed. My husband had spent his final years nurturing that backyard like a sanctuary. He built birdhouses by hand, hung a swing for our granddaughter. And every evening, as his illness worsened, we sat beneath those oaks with coffee in hand, watching sunsets filtered through green light. The trees weren't landscaping. They were memory. Every ring inside their trunks held decades of our life together. Cutting them wasn't enforcement. It was desecration. But grief has a way of sharpening focus. And the HOA had chosen the wrong target. I wasn't a retiree they could intimidate with fines. I wasn't a single mom they could bury in legal threats. I was a woman who had presided over courtrooms, read every HOA statute like gospel, and sentenced criminals twice as dangerous as suburban tyrants. Neighbors whispered that fighting the HOA was hopeless. They'd seen families bankrupted, veterans forced to sell, widows stripped of their gardens. The president thrived on fear. She thought no one would dare resist. But what she didn't realize, I'd already lost the person I loved most, which meant I was no longer afraid of losing anything else. And when fear dies, strategy begins. The first strike was documentation. I photographed every stump, every severed branch, every nest destroyed. I hired an arborist who confirmed the oaks had been healthy, structurally sound, and valued at nearly $60,000 each. I dug into HOA bylaws, highlighting where removal without homeowner consent was strictly prohibited. Then I traced the money. Invoices revealed the HOA paid a contractor owned by the president's brother-in-law. No bidding, no approval. Kickbacks hidden under emergency landscaping. It wasn't just destruction. It was fraud. But my strategy wasn't to complain at board meetings or beg for reconsideration. My strategy was war. I filed suit in district court, illegal property destruction, breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, and civil rights violations. That's when the retaliation began. Certified letters accused me of non-compliant fencing, of excessive yard clutter because of Harold's birdhouses. They fined me for leaving my porch light on too long. Each letter thicker, more absurd, more threatening. Neighbors warned me, they'll bleed you dry. But I didn't bleed. I sharpened. Because here's what the HOA didn't know. Every fraudulent fine became evidence. Every bogus claim revealed a pattern. And patterns, in a courtroom, become systematic abuse. My case grew stronger by the week. And soon, The HOA's petty harassment would spiral into a crime that even their lawyers couldn't bury. The breaking point came with fire. A neighbor's security camera caught the HOA president's landscapers dumping accelerants near my fence line, claiming they were treating weeds. Hours later, the mulch smoldered. A spark could have taken my house, my pets, and what little I had left. That footage turned my civil case into something bigger: criminal negligence. Local news picked it up. Headlines screamed, "HOA harassment crosses the line." Neighbors who'd stayed silent began stepping forward. A veteran forced to tear down his flagpole. A family fined for their daughter's wheelchair ramp. A widow evicted for planting roses in memory of her husband. The president's empire of intimidation was unraveling. But the coup de grace came from finances. With subpoenas in hand, I traced $400,000 missing from HOA reserve funds. Money supposedly earmarked for community maintenance had been siphoned into shell companies tied to the president's family. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It was embezzlement. I filed a federal RICO claim. And suddenly, the HOA president wasn't facing me alone. She was facing the U.S. Attorney's Office. The walls closed in fast. Bank accounts frozen. Depositions ordered. Contractors flipping to avoid charges. By the time trial began, the courtroom was packed. Residents filled every seat, desperate to see the tyrant fall. And when the verdict came, it landed like thunder. The gavel slammed. The jury awarded me $1.4 million in damages for property destruction, fraud, and emotional distress. But the judgment carried something even heavier. The HOA was ordered to liquidate land assets to satisfy restitution. And with that, I became the legal owner of the very greenbelt the president had fought to protect her views. The irony was biblical. She destroyed my trees for sightlines. Now I own the land that blocked her mansion like a wall. Neighbors erupted into applause outside the courthouse. Elderly residents hugged me, tears in their eyes. The veteran raised his flag again, this time without fear. Children chalked rainbows on driveways that once drew fines. And the president? She left in handcuffs. Fraud, embezzlement, abuse of power. Her empire of intimidation reduced to a cautionary tale whispered at HOA seminars nationwide. For me, the victory wasn't money. It was memory. I planted new oaks in the soil she could no longer touch. Beneath them, I buried a plaque etched with Harold's words, "Roots matter more than views." And every spring, when green leaves return, they whisper the same truth. You can cut down trees, but you can't erase justice. In the months that followed, Maple Glen transformed. The HOA board was dissolved. A new, transparent association formed under state oversight. Bylaws were rewritten to protect residents instead of punish them. And families who'd once lived in fear found their voices again. The $1.4 million judgment didn't just compensate me. It funded community renewal. Parks restored. Gardens rebuilt. Legal defense funds established to protect others from the same abuse. And perhaps most powerful of all, the story spread. News outlets across the country reported how one HOA president's arrogance triggered one of the largest judgments in Colorado HOA history. Other neighborhoods took notice. Laws were drafted to require financial transparency. Homeowners began documenting, uniting, resisting. My fight wasn't just personal revenge. It was a warning. Communities aren't kingdoms, and HOAs aren't above the law. The oaks I lost will take decades to return. But their absence planted something even stronger: precedent. So if you're listening, sitting in a house shadowed by HOA threats, remember this: bullies thrive on silence. But silence can end in a single voice, sharpened by evidence, amplified by justice. And sometimes, that voice doesn't just reclaim what was lost. It owns the land where tyrants once stood. Have you ever fought an HOA tyrant? Share your story below. You might save someone else's home. And don't forget to subscribe, because next week's story exposes the HOA board that tried to steal a veteran's pension to fund their golf course.